Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and giving me an excuse to hang out with Jessica, who I've admired from afar for a very long time. And as you know, if you've read her book, it is unbelievably poetic and just it's like hypnotic. I feel like I was reading it and got into this, somebody's nodding, like kind of a trance of beautiful language, and how she got that on the Today Show and has been so commercially successful at the same time when it is this exquisite gem of literature that never happens. So it is a triumph of goodness in the world that has given many people hope.
Thank you. Can I do the same now?
Not yet.
Oh,
no.
okay.
So what we decided we would do is just give a quick little introduction for our books, just maybe read like one page, and just to give you a sense of what they are. So I'll go first alphabetically, and then we were just going to talk. We have broken it down into 4 categories: love, grief, writing, and New York City. We're both.
We come prepared.
We are both, good girl A students, so we are ready for this. And then I think we both love questions, so we can just, and this is a great group and such a lovely space, so we can have a conversation about whatever anybody wants to talk about, not limited to those 4 rather large topics. So I've been a journalist for 30 years. All my other books have been nonfiction. I did a history of the East Village called St. Mark's is Dead. I did this memoir about my father called Also a Poet. And then I had this run of rather wacky luck, where I had multiple people in my family die. I don't know if you've had years like this where you just kind of draw all the short sticks really in a row. I moved, I got divorced. It was just a real wacky time. And I thought, what am I going to do with all this? I could do something like, I wrote a book called Why We Can't Sleep about Generation X women and hard times that we face. I thought it could be like that, or another memoir. And then I thought, or I could do a romance novel. And I thought that would be more fun for me, and certainly more fun for you. So anyway, I'm just going to read a page of this. Years ago, I pitched a book on the cultural history of the crush. No editor wanted it, despite my calling it a cultural history, which at the time felt like a publishing skeleton key. Bookstore tables teemed with cultural histories of crying, cheese, military formations, salt. But everyone I pitched said the same thing: are you insane? Crushes break your heart. They're dangerous, destabilizing, weird. I said they must be doing it wrong. Crushes were how you stayed a little bit in love with the world, even though you had a husband. They let you sort of have more than one man without society condemning you. They let berries break upon your tongue, even when you had no berries, which is the Marilyn Robinson reference. And how safe a feeling it was inside one relationship to imagine other men stacked around protectively, like sandbags. By cultivating a deep bench of break glass in case of emergency suitors, I was prepared for romantic disaster, just as I stayed primed to administer aid by re-upping my Red Cross certification every 2 years and carrying Narcan. I could feel longing, feel it hard, without believing there were implications. I scoffed at people who were led around by their feelings like leashed dogs, and I did not feel deprived or mourn what I lacked. In my fantasies, as long as those other people stayed in my head, I could be voracious while remaining faithful. I wasn't the kind of person who cheated, so only this shadowland was available, and it was enough.
I was going to read that section of her book, so I'm glad that she did it. I also just wanted to say thank you so much for having me, to Sherry, to Kristen, to April, and Eric. This church is such an important part of my everyday life and also my literary life. I drive by it when I take my daughter to school every day, and also it just feels like a really singular place. So anyway, it's just lovely to be here, and lovely to be with Ada, who I have to say has given me hope about sort of jumping between genres, which she does in ways that we haven't even talked about yet, in such a beautiful way, and that she ended up with this incredibly poetic and meaningful and raw novel as her first is pretty astonishing. So yes. I am going to read a I'm going to read a little bit from the Central Park section of my book. So the way that it's structured is that there are two main characters, Abe and Jane. Abe is an artist, Abe is a writer, and Jane is an artist. And it tells the story of their 50-year relationship from the very beginning when they meet until the very end when Jane passes away, which is obvious from the first page of the book. And then there are perspectives that are sort of outside of their perspectives. There's the perspective of Central Park, which is omniscient and contains literally thousands of anecdotes from the park that happen every day. And then there's the perspective of their son, whose name is Max, and the perspective of a woman named Alice, who gets in the middle of the relationship between Abe and Jane. So I'm going to read just 2 paragraphs from Central Park. Some people come to the park because they want to fall in love for the first time, the 12th time, the final time. Some have been used, widowed, or bored stiff. They have spent the past decade in deep introspection, falling in love with themselves and no one else first. Some come for a short respite, roughly 20 blocks, west to east, east to west, from a spouse who will not help themselves or from no one home. She even took the dog. You can't imagine the sudden quiet. The park is a beating heart, an adagio, a dreamy parenthesis. Abe and Jane come after chemo, and because they never know when it might be the last time. There are 6 bottles of pills, 2 notarized wills, and a nebulizer in a tote between them. Jane can walk only a few steps without needing to rest, but you couldn't tell that from the serene composure on her face. The park is where the most important moments of their lives have taken place. The park is their home away, homing device, pen pal, 5th season. Every year, there are nearly 250 weddings at the Loeb Boathouse. There are 19 other suggested venues on centralparkweddinglocations.com within the park's 843 acres. There are hundreds of marriage proposals on Bow Bridge every year. We found each other on Facebook. We met last week. We have 3 kids and 2 dogs and a whole lot of chickens together. Most take place between Thanksgiving and Christmas, but there is an upward tick around Valentine's Day too. There are thousands of engagement shoots, mostly in June and October, because, arguably, those are the park's most standout times. The machinist wears all white. The personal assistant has been juicing for a week. In the park, there is hand-holding, making out, blushing, the sharing of ham and cheese sandwiches, iced teas, double chocolate chip cookies, blazers, gloves, tissues, and headphones playing Billie Holiday. There is a lot of so-called quality time. There are at least a dozen domestic disputes reported to the park precinct a week, and oh yes, sir, I really did want to wring his neck. Thank you. I'm wondering if I can start by just asking, our books came out within weeks of each other, I think, in February, so it's been 6 months, and how you're feeling, where you are in the process. Are you feeling done? I have to say I have absolute amnesia when it comes to this book. I am sorry, my agent is here and I can see her like twitching in her seat. But once I'm done with a book, I feel pretty done, and now I'm on to the next. So it's funny to be talking about this now.
Is it like Weekend with Bernie's, where you're just like dancing
totally.
around?
Yeah, it is exactly like Weekend with Bernie. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I did a substantial tour with this, and every stop was completely different. And it's one thing I find so interesting is what people pick up on, especially in different places. Like I did one event, and there is not to give too much away, there's a father dies in it. It was part of me sort of processing my own father's death through writing fiction about it. And like I had one tour stop where everybody just wanted to talk about grief. And I don't know why. It was just, I think somebody had just lost somebody and somebody else had also. And so we wound up, and it wound up being this kind of co-counseling grief session.
The best.
I mean, it was amazing. And I hand sold, I think, a dozen copies of the book Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is a great book about grief. I don't know if Canya's has it. It's really wonderful. They like had all these orders. I think it was in Miami. So, and then the next night, it was like everyone would talk about Teen Beat magazine, right? And like all of these like pinups, like who did you have on your wall? It was River Phoenix for me, but like, and crushes and this deliciousness of it. And then the next night, it was all about marriage and different forms of marriage and what works in a long marriage and what doesn't work. And so I had the best time because it was, and I think I just learned so much about the people who came and read it and what registered for them. So what about you? What's your, because I feel like you've done a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, it was fast and furious, and it felt like it was a really intense couple of months, and then it sort of died off, and I was grateful for that. And it comes up again, and I find, like, this sort of the same way that you do, that in every conversation it is about something else. And I do love that, because you get to revisit the book in different ways every time and be reminded of things that you sort of didn't know you were putting down. I had this conversation not long after the book came out with someone, and they said how much of the book is sort of autobiographical. And I hadn't really thought about that at all, and the parallels are really obvious. They're glaring, in fact. My mother is a writer. My father was an artist. My mother took care of my father as he died. We grew up next to Central Park. I don't know what else I can give you that is absolutely pulled from the book, but I didn't set out in any way to write an autobiographical novel, and to kind of be alerted to that by someone who wasn't me or my therapist or my mother was really surprising and meaningful, actually. Yeah.
It's so interesting because so my narrator, who is unnamed, lives in an unnamed place, and nobody is direct. There's no direct corollaries to anybody. But it came out of trying to make sense of all this life, as I think a lot of novels do, right? Like written by men, written by women across time. This is a thing. But that was a question I got in this way that was interesting to me, and I wonder if you got it too, where it was a little bit like, yeah, but how much? Like, what's the percentage? So I was actually doing an event with Curtis Sittenfeld, if people know her. So she and I were doing an event, and we thought we were very smart. We came up with this plan. We're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the bookstores are going to switch to doing from real to not real. So the not real, it'll just be a spectrum, right? So the end is one spectrum is like science fiction, right? And the other end is like, presidential biographies, right? And then in the middle, you'll have memoirs and autobiographical novels, and some of the things that would be called novels will be more true than some of the things that are called memoirs, with people who are maybe like a little, casual about fact-checking.
That question really pisses me off. I find it really minimizing. I mean, I think that, it is our job to create stories, and as soon as you ask that question, you undermine our work. Like, that is literally our work. That is the crux of what we do, is to create something out of nothing. And so as soon as you ask someone that, I think that you just undermine all that they do.
Well, and I think it's a little bit, it is a little bit like, well, if you didn't make up enough, then it doesn't count as fiction. I'm reminded there was, so my last book was partly about the poet Frank O'Hara. He was giving a reading, and Jack Kerouac yelled from the audience. He said, O'Hara, you're killing American poetry. And then O'Hara said back, that's more than you could do. So I kind of think a little bit like when people are like, you didn't make anything up. I was like, well, more than you could do. I don't see your...
I love these insults that we get as authors. They're really interesting. Julie and I, my agent and I, talk about this a lot. But I've gotten some... I don't read my Amazon reviews as... Oh, me neither. But sometimes I read my Amazon reviews.
Don't do it.
But I got one that said... basically, the person felt hoodwinked that this was a book of poetry. It was like the diggiest dig they could have given me, and I thought, like, I'll take that all day long. Yeah. If that's the worst thing you can say about this book, that it was a book of poetry, I'll take that all day long. But it's funny what people will throw at you as a jab.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think because my book is, like, red and pink, that I think people thought it was, like, a romance novel, and maybe it got kind of, like, sent early to some Goodreads people as a romance novel. And they were mad.
It is not a romance novel.
They were real mad, yeah. They're like, there is Dietrich Bonhoeffer in this book. This is not a romance novel.
Can I ask you a little bit about, so your book is definitely about the love of a spouse and the love of a not spouse and the love of a child and the love of a parent, but it is also so much about the love of literature. And there are, I don't know how many references you have, and they span the scope. I mean, there's George Eliot, there's Dostoevsky, there's Kate DiCamillo, there's Whitney Houston and Dolly Parton also, which I loved. But you really sort of run the gamut, and it lands so beautifully, page by page. I mean, how did you do that?
Some people find it exhausting.
Oh, I love.
But that is how I talk to. I mean, I've always got stacks of books around and listening to things and I think so. The book is a little bit about trying to figure out love and what we owe each other and what do we owe ourselves ultimately when it comes to love. And if love appears, do we throw it away if it's inconvenient, or do we find some kind of way to fit it into our life, and what does that look like? So whenever I have questions like that, I go to the library and I get a giant stack of books. I feel like even a love triangle can be solved if the library card, right? and buying enough books from wonderful bookstores like you have here, fortunately in Sag Harbor, and listening to music and talking to people. So I think every book I've written, whether fiction or not nonfiction, is just packed with anything that could be helpful, like just throwing it all at the problem. So and then I want to talk about this because how did you do this? This is like, it is so beautifully crafted. And like I said, it's this, some literature, it takes on some kind of quality that is like a drug, like it's like intoxicating. So I imagine that it took a long time to cook this. Did it take a long time?
It took a long time.
Yeah.
It took a really long time. Thank you. That's very nice. So it started maybe 7 or 8 or 9 or 100 years ago, and it started very differently. It was very small, and it was the story of a woman, actually, who was probably in her late 30s, and she was dying, and at the end of her life, she was writing the story of sort of the most important thing that had ever happened to her, and then that didn't work. And so then, and it was also very much about fiction. It was about the craft of fiction. It's about the Freytag triangle. It was really heady, and like nobody should have bought that book, and nobody would have read it, it worked out. And then for a long time, I worked with just the characters of Abe and Jane, who are the main characters in this book, and thought for many years that was going to be the extent of the book. It was going to be their stories. But it was really small. It was a really tight book and kind of constricted, and I also couldn't sell that book. And then I got to a point, I sent it to a friend who's a writer, and she said, some people have heard this story before, but she said, this feels like it's just one part of the love story. And it really sort of opened up everything for me and made me think about the ways that, and we talked a little bit about this, that no love exists in a vacuum. Every love is dependent on other relationships and timing and all the things. And so what would make this very small, very tight novel feel more comprehensive and more generous, and that was to bring in the particular other perspectives that I did. And that was done in the building just down the street in 3 months. It tripled in length. So sometimes the writing comes like a gift. Sometimes it comes like the longest, most painful death I can ever imagine. But then sometimes it comes like a shot, and it's so special when that happens, and that did happen with this. And then I thought that I was going to just send it to one person, and this person is Julie, who I had given 3 manuscripts. Was it 3? Yeah, this was either the 3rd or 4th manuscript, and I thought, if she doesn't take this book on, it's going to be sort of maybe the end of the road for me with writing. I thought that I was going to just teach forever, and that would have been okay. And Julie very emphatically said yes, and it changed the course of this book and my life and like all the things. So
we should all give flowers to Julie.
We should all give flowers to Julie forever.
Well done.
So it was a long, arduous process, and fortunately, the book that I'm working on now is coming much more quickly, and there's a deadline, which is probably a really good thing for me. That's where we are now.
Yeah. Well, and you said that no love story exists in a vacuum. I just think that the way you do this in the book, it's almost like Our Town, or some other thing where have you heard that before?
Yeah.
That's the highest compliment I can pay. It's my favorite play. But just because you create this tapestry, this place that's so vivid and so exactly what anybody who's walked around Central Park has felt, but it's actually given voice.
It's interesting because you, in certain ways, have done the opposite, which is that you don't give your narrator a name, you don't give your protagonist a name, and you don't give a place a name, but you give so much else a name. Like, you give such a singular feeling, which is this feeling of So what I think that was so special about this book is, one, reading it felt very kind of like illicit and propulsive, because it was about this thing that we don't talk about so much, which is having a crush, and especially having a crush within a marriage, outside your marriage, but within a marriage, and how crushes are a critical part of staying alive. What am I asking you about that? Except, can you talk about that a little?
Crushes are great. That's your
crushes are
takeaway
great.
for the. Yeah, I think that crushes are something that we don't necessarily talk about too much because of what those editors said when I was originally trying to do something nonfiction, which is that they wreak havoc if you let them, right? There's something about them that is this portal to another world. It's this opening to this other life that you could have, where you're the kind of person who winds up dating, that barista that you see every morning, and what would that be like? And almost always the fantasy is very different from what the reality would actually be. So in the book, it's like, what would happen if you actually did pursue that crush? What would it develop into? And then what would it force you to do once you realized how important this other person was to you?
You do seem to like to talk about things that I think, right now are so much at the forefront of my mind, but the particular experience of women and being in their 40s and feeling like there's so much that we have sort of been pigeonholed into, and like being denied a crush is a critical part of that, but also your acknowledgments. I think that you call your mother and grandmother having done unhistoric acts. Is that what you say?
Yeah, the George Eliot line. I've loved that book so much.
Talk a little bit about like the 40s and that place of being a woman then.
Yeah, so I wrote this book about Gen X women called Why We Can't Sleep that was about the ways that it's different, like not necessarily harder, but just different hard for women of my generation than it was for our mothers and grandmothers, in the ways in which being told you can be anything, even president, while true technically, came with a lot of strings attached. And then in some ways we were sold a bill of goods because the context that we grew up in wasn't really conducive to having all the things and having it be easy. So that's true of this character too. And I think there are a lot of women who get into midlife and they can't really remember how to have fun or who they are or what they like, even just very basic things.
Or who they like.
Or what they want out of life, or what their values are. And I think for me and for the narrator, there is a tendency to want to be good, to do the right thing, and to be faithful and true in all these different ways. And what happens when your values shift in a way where actually maybe pursuing love in a profound way, like love of self even, is more important than doing the right, what you've been sort of raised to think is just the right thing. And I think that connects to yours. So I think the woman in this book is actually a very successful artist and has been able to have a family also, but really puts her work first. And I think that was so interesting to see a woman, and especially of that era, doing that in your book. And can you talk a little bit about that phenomenon and just this idea in general of how you sacrifice your family for your art for your family?
Yeah. Yes, I've become rather passionate about this project and about talking about it, because I feel like there's been a lot of pushback, in fact, about Jane. Yeah, which I don't know, feels surprising, but nonetheless. So Jane she's an artist, she's a visual artist, and she loves creating art, and when her son is born, she expects that she'll be the mother that she always thought she would be, which is loving and maternal and present. And she's not, for a number of reasons, but the foremost being that she has an incredible bout of post-traumatic and postpartum, and she sort of can't find her way out of it, and then can't find her way back to her son for the entirety of the relationship. They just kind of missed each other in the beginning, and then continue to miss each other for the rest of their lives. And people have such a hard time with Jane, and as soon as they do, my back goes up, and I say, we don't know if we're going to be good mothers or not, and sometimes it's really hard, because sometimes we love other things as much as we love our own children, and that's complicated, but it is also true. And in her case, she loved creating art, and she also really loved her husband. And that's something that I think is not talked about too terribly much, is the relationship between two people and how a child can sometimes complicate that. Sometimes, of course, not complicate it, but sometimes it does. So it's been really interesting to talk about this character who I now have so much sort of, I feel very protective of her in a way that I wasn't intending to. I didn't write her to be to push any boundaries. I wrote her because I felt like it's a really true thing that women experience. But I've been surprised by people's visceral reactions to her. Right. Yeah.
And meanwhile, I think to the men, I could think of like the infinite number of male characters who would be like slightly conflicted about parenting.
Yeah.
And
right.
that is noble, yes. Character.
Yeah, and I think also when men have a complicated time being a parent, one, we don't say that men have a complicated time being a parent, but nobody asks them why. And for her, I think it was all the things. It was that she loved her art, it's that she missed her mother, it's that she loved her husband. And so it's a very interesting thing to feel like I have to justify her actions, or that she has to justify her actions. She just kind of was, and it was hard, and that's it, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. How close are we to getting audience questions?
I would say it's up to you guys. I mean, whenever.
Are people burning with questions? Full of questions? Nobody's like, okay. Yes, there.
Eric, go ahead.
We can go back and forth.
Curious, you were talking about the responses to your books. Talking about the responses to your books, so you're talking about audience. And I'm interested in whether you have an ideal audience sense that's part of how you write, why you write kind of thing, or, anything. Can you talk around that?
Yeah, that's lovely. It takes us into the writing component of what we were talking about earlier. So we have very different paths. So I came up in newsrooms, and I ghostwrite other people's books is my day job now. And so I've always just interviewed people and reported and had deadlines and all this kind of stuff. And so it's definitely a better done than perfect philosophy. And I have thought not very much at all about specific audiences, except to the extent that I don't want to bore anybody. Because I worked at the New York Post, for example, for a minute, for a few months, and you're writing those headlines and those opening things. You have to have all the if it bleeds, it leads, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So coming from there, I think that has guided my audience interest. But I think you have such a formal precision and such a sort of brilliance around the craft that I admire and know very little about.
We were talking about this earlier. I do feel like there are a lot of very special things about getting an MFA. There are some drawbacks, which is that there's so many rules, and some of them I still sort of hear in my head. And one of them is, do not have an audience. You are writing for yourself. And now I don't really believe that to be true. I mean, now I have very specific people that I feel like I write for now. My mother, in certain ways, because she's such a good reader and she reads such a wide variety of things. Julie, for sure, because she knows not only who I am and the way that I write and sort of what I'm trying to do before I know what I'm trying to do, but also what will sell. So there are many people that I'm now writing for, and then also because there are certain things that I want out of my books now. Like I do want people to like them, and I don't think that I think had I admitted that at my MFA program, I would have been laughed out of the program, and I really don't think there's anything wrong with that. And in certain ways, I feel like I'm now shape-shifting a little bit in order to satisfy that. Not that I will ever be able to satisfy everybody's requests, but I certainly don't want to have a tricky relationship with my readers. I want them to trust me, and I want them to write the books that I am writing, like the books that I am writing. So, yeah.
So on the book tour for this, I was in Iowa, and it was all Iowa writing students, and it was completely blew my mind. The question and answer was really pretty funny. So one question was, now that you've written an auto-fictional book, will you write a real novel? And then the second question I got was somebody who said he had writer's block, and was struggling to find the joy again in his writing. This was a young man of about 20. And I said, nobody needs your books, right? Like, nobody is holding a gun to your head. Like, there are so many things you can do in your life that are not writing a book. And so if you do not want to write the book, do not write the book. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't
He
really...
hated that answer so much.
I'm sure. I'm not really sure what to say about that whole MFA thing. I mean, I think it's like buying time to write. I think it's very special for that reason, very singular. And you're around peers. In certain cases, they will be the readers that you have for the rest of your life. But I also think everything starts to smell the same at a certain point. I think because you're being taught by the same people and because you're trying to satisfy those particular people, you are all writing for the same people in the same way, and it all starts to look pretty similar. Yeah. It's a sad thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there other questions?
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
Just picking up off something you just touched upon and Jessica alluded to, and we were talking about briefly in the back, which is why? Why do you do it? And Jessica, you had mentioned when you were talking about the length that it took to write Love Story, and you were going to give up. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you give up?
I mean, like, the most obvious answer is that I don't know what else I would do with myself. Like, not, and again, nobody is waiting for my next book, but like, I
think a lot of people are actually in the it's not the same as
bless
this guy.
them all, yeah. I think, like, the way that I have always organized the world is in language, and if it was in my head, I guess that would be okay. But it would also be like really exhausting and probably pretty lonely. And I think that the way that now I engage with the world is through my writing. Like, the relationships I have, the reason that I wake up in the morning, my daughter knows that I'm a writer. Like, all those reasons kind of propel me to write every day. But I think the most obvious one is that, like, I literally would not know how else to process my thoughts, deal with my neuroses, be a human if it wasn't my daily practice and my job. Yeah.
I just write to get invitations like this one, so I can like come to Sag Harbor and hang out for a night and eat some oysters. Yeah. So I don't know what else to do with all the things that happen. Yeah. Like, I feel like I have to make something out of them when there are these runs of deaths, for example, or when I'm reading these other books that are so inspiring, or I see stories happening and I want to document them. I need to make something out of it, or else what am I doing? It feels compulsive and helpful. I think there's something, so my last book was about my father, and we'd had a very difficult relationship, and I think a couple of people said they'd read it, but people who didn't, I found all these cassette tapes my father had recorded in the 1970s as Frank O'Hara's official biographer, and then he never finished the book. And I found the tapes, and I thought, I could finish this in my sleep. I write books for people, I've ghostwritten 35 books, and I could do this right now. And then also I could kind of show him up, because we were a little competitive with each other. And then I started working on it, and all hell broke loose. It wound up being very difficult for a lot of reasons. My father was diagnosed with cancer. My parents' building burned up in a freak electrical fire. I ran into the estate problems my father had run into 40 years earlier. And so the book wound up being a memoir about my dad and me. And I tried to use it to, like, literally change my life. I tried to say, okay, I'm writing this book. Why don't you be nice to me? And then I can have a nice scene where you are a good character.
Memoir is so limiting.
Well, that's the thing. I think I get all this advice all the time, which says you're supposed to write from your scars, not your wounds. But I'm writing it while they're talking, exactly while it's happening. And
be careful what you say.
Yes, watch out. And it didn't work, and I think it became interesting why it didn't work. Yeah. And the story actually became his refusal to ever yield in any way that would be helpful for our relationship was the story, and then that wound up being the book.
It is wild how these things work out, isn't it? I have there's a reason that I'm writing now too, which was never a thing before, but now I find that I'm like so superstitious about certain things, and I feel if I write them, then they won't happen to me, which is so absurd, but it is true. And so for a little while, I really wanted to write a school shooting novel because I felt like if I, it's just so weird, and I don't know if I say it out loud.
Bringing
if
an
I'm-
umbrella and it doesn't rain.
Exactly. And so, so I tried that, and I did work on it for a while, and then I was told that no one would read it. But I did write a chunk of it, and I wonder how that plays out in the superstitious. Like, will the superstitious gods favor me kindly because I did write part of it? And not, nobody has to answer
There will
that.
just be a lockdown drill.
Right,
'cause you
exactly.
half did it.
Exactly.
We have other questions.
Ada, hi. I was wondering, are you working on another book of fiction? I started reading Crush, and I loved it so much that I read also a poet. And I know who your father is, because I was married to a sculptor. And then now I'm reading Wedding Toasts I'll Never Give, which is wonderful. There are a lot about the challenges of loving people, not just relationships, I mean, not just husband or lover relationship, but also father and in general people. Do you see that as something that's a theme for you, I guess is the question?
Yes, I definitely do. So yeah, every book I think that I've ever done has been grappling with whatever I'm thinking about that in that particular moment in time. And so, yeah, so for Wedding Toast, I was trying to stay married, and my husband was driving me completely insane. And so I wrote this, and I was going to all these weddings because we got married rather young. So I was imagining all these toasts that I would give about the realities of a long marriage, and did not give because they're a bummer for young, very excited, happy newlyweds. So that was what I was thinking about then, and then I was having a really rough time of middle age and sort of perimenopause and caregiving and sandwich. I was like taking care of my dad who was ill, and then a little kid and all this stuff. So and then I wound up writing this book about the generation. And so yeah, every era, and I think love is the through line because that's the most. I mean, don't we all struggle with that the most? I definitely do.
Jess, you and I have talked about this, how my sense of the story of postpartum, the rendering of the exquisite pain and difficulty and distance, it was so well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Patty.
My question, I think, is for both of you, but Jess in particular, did you feel a tug in any way to pull her back to a good girl? You know, and not make her like a Louise Bourgeois kind of character who's a wonderful artist but maybe a shit mother. You're both right, and it sounds like the Crush is also writing about a transgressive woman. Is there a tug, because you're writing for the greater issue of women's issues, to make the characters stand for something in that conversation?
I think that's such a beautiful question. The answer is I never thought about it. Like, I never thought about her being anyone else, and maybe that's just a kind of short circuit of my own brain, that like my characters are who they are, and they tend to come to me like pretty fully formed, and she was so much that. And to change her would have been to like render everything in the book terribly different. Her relationship would have been different with her husband. The whole theme of art in the book would have shifted and like been sort of minimized and diluted. And so no. It has been an interesting thing to see that other people would have wanted me to pull her back a little bit. And in fact, it has galvanized me in a way and sort of propelled me in a way to write women that are complex and that make people uncomfortable, because for the people who resonate with Jane, they have such a connection with her, and they feel so much less lonely. And you know, this whole thing of like why we read, I read to feel less lonely. Like, I read to see myself on the page in a way that, you know, that maybe I don't get to talk about with people. And I feel like Crush is a book that it's not permissive, but it's reflective. So it like offers up this way of living in the world that we don't talk about that much, that feels very taboo in this culture, but reading it allows me to feel less alone. So no, I would never pull back one of my characters to satisfy anybody. And maybe that's like just because I don't have the capacity to do that. They arrive as who they are, and I trust in them enough to kind of give them that on the page.
So I was asked to adapt a book of mine for TV, and it didn't get made. But I got to write the pilot and with a writer, and our thing was the character isn't particularly likable. There's that whole, the likable woman, you need a likable woman. And we're like, but she's very lovable. So we kept saying that is, lovable is the new likable. And that actually a lot of people who aren't particularly nice or gentle or all the things that we think of as good feminine qualities, they can be pretty great and lovable anyway, or especially because of that.
Hi. Alice had a big crush.
A big crush.
Yes, she did.
Yeah, what do you think of her as a woman?
Oh, what do I think of her as a
We're all
woman?
talking about the mom, which I didn't really get to yet, but Alice.
So Alice is the character in the book who sort of gets between the relationship between Abe and Jane. And I have a very tender spot for Alice because she reminds me so much of my undergraduate students, which is like very young and open-eyed and has this really dreamy relationship with love. She's very naive. And she is very much that. And I mean, to make it so silly, like it does take two to tango. I don't know if you're asking if I blame her as a woman.
No, you're all talking about the mother as being,
Complicated.
not like,
Yeah.
like a normal mother. So is this girl.
It's such an interesting question. Like I don't know what this is about. Like, did she overstep? In her terms, no. Like, I think that she was, without saying too much about the book, I think that she kind of was living the love story of her life. And to her, it kind of meant everything. And I think it's more a question, like with her at least, of perspective. So for her, her love of Abe was the biggest love she ever had. It was the biggest story she ever had. It was so endlessly huge. And for Abe, it was really a drop in the bucket. And I think, so more than anything, I think that's kind of what I was trying to do with Alice, is to show the ways in which within one kind of love story, one very expansive love story, there are different ways of looking at any and all the relationships therein. Does that make sense? Yeah.
You said you've ghostwritten 35 books, so clearly you're very good at that. What's the best part of that kind of writing, and what's the worst part of that kind of writing?
So I love it. I feel really lucky that I get to do it. It is because the market will not bear 3 books by me a year, so I can do them for other people. And it's, I think there is this idea that it's cheating to have somebody help you with your book, but everybody has help with their books. You have editors, you have copy editors, you have fact checkers. And so I am just an extra editor usually, where I do what they used to do, I think, in the 50s and go sit by the pool at Sag Harbor and draw the story out of the famous person. So I go and I spend time with people who have really interesting stories, but who aren't professional writers, and I help them figure out what they want to say, and then say, is this what you mean? And then they mark it up and they say, not really, I've never used this word, this is good, whatever, and then we write it together the way they want it. So for me, it's also great because I get to do all the stuff I like doing, structuring a book, researching, things like that. And it's not my name on it, and it's very liberating. I get to it's like doing crossword puzzles all day, where it feels low stakes, but I want them to be happy and do something they're proud of. So I find it really joyful doing it, helping people tell their stories.
Does the author have to say it was ghostwritten?
Well, I think there is some idea that it's not really them writing it. If there is a ghostwriter or collaborator on it, most books by famous people have collaborators, and it's just how much do you do. And again, it's this. You could do a spectrum. You could go to the famous aisle and do like the sci-fi to presidential biography spectrum for that too, where and I have had cases, not very many, where the person was very, very busy and did not do a lot of their own writing or and some storytelling, and I had to go like fill in, like go talk to their family, go talk to their coworkers, go talk whatever, and then help fill in the story. They still have to say, this is me, this is my book. But I've also had times when somebody wrote 600 pages and I had to cut it down to 200 and make it still feel like they wanted it, and so that's another kind, right? But yeah, it's not cheating to have help, right? We have editors too.
I wanted to ask you to talk just a little bit more about transgressive women and transgressive women authors. I think of Rachel Cusk, for instance, as kind of a transgressive woman who's an author, not just her character. She just seems to embody that free-spiritedness, but also she's very harsh, I think. So it's interesting. I think her books are fascinating, but they sort of drive me crazy because she also pushes, in my opinion, she pushes the reader away a little bit and doesn't seem to care. I don't know. But then I think about, okay, so is this like something that is happening more and more as a kind of a revelatory style of writing, perhaps? But then I think about Harriet the Spy. I think about learning about Joan of Arc when I was little. I don't know what to do with that. It's like, does it always feel new because we're always being pushed back, or I just wanted you to talk about it more because I found this fascinating.
Well, I just want to say that a blurber wrote a blurb that I didn't use as part of, but it was comparing Crush to Rachel Cusk with empathy. But I thought that's kind of a dig at Rachel Cusk, and I didn't want to do that. But I know what you're saying. She is such a beautiful writer, and also there is a little bit of a distancing. Yeah, if you can't take it. Yes.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think more in, for example, the fact that Miranda July's All Fours went so, I don't like using the term viral, but that it was so hot, I think does say something about the way that these kind of transgressive women are falling in our culture. Like there seems to be, I mean, that thing was on the bestseller list for so long, and it's everywhere, and in every state. That's different than I think it used to be, and that feels meaningful, and I don't know how much that has to do with the perimenopause conversation that's happening right now and also feels very hot. But I think that there is a need for books like that, and to kind of like blow our heads off a little bit and make us feel like, one, we're not alone in this experience, but two, it's something that, half of the world goes through, and we should be talking about it. So, yeah, and I would also say that, like, for so long, I have also loved these transgressive women books, and when I now think about them, they're not terribly transgressive. Like, women who are questioning their marriage are not women who are doing anything in any way naughty or perverse. Like, this is natural, this is actually intelligent to do that. But it's interesting because I never thought about the ways that I've always loved those books, and I've always kind of thought, like, why do I love these books? Am I not supposed to love these books? That says something, too, about the whole movement or lack of movement until now. Yeah.
I have a question. We have time for a couple of more. My question is, what did you learn about love by writing these books?
What a question. Holy shit.
Thanks, Sherry. I learned. So I think that for my character, what she figured out is that Whitney Houston is the wisest sage of our time.
Oh, yeah, this
And that-
comment you made about Whitney Houston in here, I had no idea.
Yeah, so people know the song "Greatest Love of All." We sang it in 5th grade graduation, I believe, and I did not know it was about loving yourself and trusting yourself.
Did anybody know that?
Yeah,
Oh.
everybody else knew that but us. But
Cool.
yeah.
Great.
So I did not quite realize that when I was 12, and it didn't sink in later even. But I think that this character realizes that there is something very primal about love of self that gets lost, especially for middle-aged women who are doing a lot of caregiving and taking care of everybody and trying to make everything be okay and trying not to take up too much space. And you do that long enough and you forget who you are and what you want. And so you mentioned Dolly Parton earlier. So Dolly Parton has this line, you need to figure out who you are and do it on purpose. And so I think that is love of self, and I think that is the most important thing. And then everything else becomes possible. Then you can love your kids and your parents and your spouse and your crush and whoever else.
I don't know if I have an answer, but I will say, like, one thing that I felt very singularly in this book is that it really made me love, which is that writing about a relationship over 50 years with all the ebbs and flows that happen naturally in every relationship that lasts that long is a privilege and a very special thing. I've been in a relationship for 21 years, and I feel so grateful for it. And writing this book kind of reinforced that in me. It was kind of a reminder that it's a joy, it's an honor, it's a witness, it's like all the things to grow old with someone. And so, like, for example, I've talked a lot about, the affair in this book, and there is an affair in this book. And I think in certain ways, like, the affair is what kept them together. They were able to get through the hard stuff is what allowed for the beauty. The bittersweet is what allowed for, like, the bitter for the sweet, blah, blah, blah. But I feel that in my own life, like that, just that it's a privilege. Like, it's a privilege to love and to be loved.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, that both these books, they're about love, but there's also death in them, and betrayal, and despair, and all of these other things. And I do think maybe it is hard to have a love story that's very believable without all of the dark side in it, too. Because they go hand in hand. I think that's also true of grief, right? If you actually lean into grief and go through it, then you realize how much joy is possible.
Yeah, I mean, to make it very personal, somebody recently said, like, your relationship seems so good, and I am very lucky to be in a relationship that is good, but, like, we went through so much hard together, and I think that's what allows for the good. That very much happens in this book. Like, they go through a lot of hard together, and that's what allows for the good.
Also, the reality that you're both writing about heterosexual relationships as women processing the death of your fathers from cancer.
This is true.
You just
Anything
put that together?
else?
Say more.
I don't know, but I'm available for sessions. I'll just say that.
You're hired.
So that's it. Anybody from the audience have any further questions? Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.